about the history of early Christianity in the Roman Empire. Tess has, a number of you have, Matakis has had. And so if you know that history, you know that Christianity was outlawed, they were feeding Christians to the lions. But then over time, Christians kind of got, early Christians in the Roman Empire, kind of got sick of being treated as second-class citizens. Got sick of being, who wants to be fed to a lion? But got sick of that treatment. And so they started to organize. But they were outlawed, they were banned, they were not understood, they were feared, they were marginalized. And so what they would do is they would draw a little fish symbol on the side of a wall, side of an aqueduct, inside a tunnel. And that fish symbol, everyone in the community knew what that meant was, hey, we're Christians, we're going to get together. Don't tell anybody, we're going to get together. Well, there's this parallel there between what Christians had to go through in the Roman Empire and what dyslexics have had to go through in America in modern times. And it's a shame, it's a crying shame, it's been unnecessary. But the organizing group, state by state, that has helped turn things around, that is not organized, so that parents and students don't have to say to each other in public schools, you know, this is what you have to do in an IEP, and you actually have some rights. They no longer have to whisper. And the reason is because of this extraordinary organization called Decoding Dyslexia that so many of you already know about. Not so long ago, they didn't exist. Okay, there was nothing quite like this. And Christians in the Roman Empire got to the point where they were actually pretty powerful. They got to the point where, as you know, the emperor, Constantine, said, you know what? Christianity is now legal. Christians can be public. They don't have to hide in tunnels. They don't have to whisper to each other. And that day in the United States is not too far off. And a big reason for that is decoding dyslexia, working state by state with state legislatures. And there is going to be a day in the not too distant future when the President of the United States is going to say, you know what? But all this grassroots work, all this campaign that's been happening state by state, we now need to recognize it nationally. We need to recognize it in a federal way. And these folks, bright, interesting, dynamic, creative, problem-solving dyslexic students, are no longer going to be second-class citizens in our society. And when that happens, the symbol at that point that's going to be turned to is not the fish symbol, the symbol will be DD. And we are really excited tonight because a lot of the folks who got this movement started are here tonight in these rows, are going to tell you some of their story and tell you what you can do to be empowered. Students, parents, there is a lot you can do to change the situation for dyslexics in our society. There's a lot of older students here who are moving on to college who have benefited from this movement, and you can help the next generation of dyslexics, some of whom are in this room, have an easier time, not the same struggle you've had, by joining with these adults and joining with this movement. So, first of all, the woman who got this started, the first chapter of Decoding Dyslexia, her name is Deb Lyman. She's right here. She'll be part of the panel discussion tonight. She started it in New Jersey, and she basically helped create a template for it elsewhere. Folks from other states, including some parents here, would call Deb and say, how do I do this? And didn't you even have a handbook you developed and started handing out and said, look, this is a state-by-state organization. It's a grassroots organization. It's not about the people, the leaders. It's about the whole movement. Here's how you do it. And it took off from there. It moved on to our own state, New York State, and Deb Rafferty, who is here in upstate New York, and Barbara Vivolo, who is here from Long Island, and has a daughter here at the school. Basically, Barbara and Deb did the divide and conquer approach. And they said, all right, you take downstate New York, Long Island, upstate New York, and let's do this. We also have from Decoding Dyslexia New York 2 other folks, both from upstate, right? Melissa Wilson and Wendy Barrett. We all know Wendy here and Ben. And they also have been working with Deb and Barbara in New York State on legislative issues, in making things better in our very challenging, very struggling New York State public education system. So it's a thrill to have you all here tonight. We also have Tina Marie DeLong, who is founder and leader of Decoding Dyslexia Pennsylvania, and is also an advocate. A number of you students have been to meetings in your public school where you have an advocate fighting for you, that's what Mr. Long does in Pennsylvania for a number of families. And then we have folks here also from Decoding Dyslexia in Connecticut who aren't going to speak but are helping and supporting tonight. And then we have another extraordinary person here tonight. Some of you have been tested by her, Dr. Allison Curley. And she is just as busy as all the other evaluators in the LD world, and yet as busy as she is, she doesn't pull up in her office as so many evaluators feel they have to do. She gets out of her office, joins the grassroots movement, has joined Decoding Dyslexia New York, and has helped petition the state government to help change things for dyslexic students in public schools. So it's an honor to have Dr. Curley here tonight as well. Have I forgotten anybody? Just Alanella, I'm sorry. New York represents. That's right.
It's now going to be hard to go. We're going to put you to work.
We're also.
I like him already.
And he will be an excellent spokesperson for you, I can tell you. He's got it down. And he wears awesome bow ties.
Okay. Great. Bow ties got me. All right.
We're also honored by the presence of two members of the Board of Trustees, students, as I was describing today, they're like our guardian angels. And that includes Georgette Dickman, who's driven up from New Jersey for the event. Georgette, thanks for joining us tonight. And has also been instrumental in training teachers and raising awareness for the public school system in New Jersey. And then you've all seen him at meals. Mr. Wilson Anderson, the chair of our board, is in the back. We all love your sweater. Wilson, we love the story. Students asked Wilson today, where'd you get that sweater? He said, I pulled it off my dead uncle. And that's all. So it's already a legend. And Wilson, like Georgette, has trained teachers and kind of worked with dyslexic students and has spread the dyslexic gospel throughout the country. And so we're honored by his presence as well. Deb, thank you. Take it from here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. I love that analogy that you gave. We are so excited to be here. Thank you so much. First, I will admit I am not cool enough, amazing enough to have dyslexia. But can I ask you why you think that maybe I might have gotten involved with Decoding Dyslexia New York? Anyone want to take a guess? The bow tie. What's that? Family member. That's exactly it. So I started off on this journey with, I have two amazing sons, and one happens to have dyslexia. And when I first started in my journey, it was a little bit hopeless. And I met some amazing people like Wendy Baird that actually provided me some right resources to get help for my family and my son. And when I went to some of these support groups, I realized that there were grandparents there that were advocating and fighting for their grandchildren. And they were all doing something in their community. And I became really angry. Tell them I'll take it later. Someone's calling me. And I became really angry because everyone was doing something in their community. And we didn't have to like speak up. We had to shout, we had to roar, like, hey, stop. This isn't right. It really comes down to the quality of life. And I remember calling Deborah Lynham and saying, we want in. We want in. How do we do this? How do we get this collective voice so we can shout? And it has been such an amazing journey. And I will tell you, the last time I was in Kildonan, my son, who is 10, that has dyslexia, was here. And at that time, a couple years ago, we were meeting with Ben Foss speaking. Was anyone here a couple years ago to hear Ben Foss speak? And we were sitting right there, our whole family. And my son at that time didn't want to tell anybody that he had dyslexia. Shh, don't tell anyone. And because he had just gotten that identification, and Ben Foss was talking about the Tesla, comparing it to the dyslexic brain versus the regular readers, the normal brains, and he was so engaged. He was learning about how amazing dyslexia was. And so Ben asked, and I will never forget this, Ben asked, if you have dyslexia, stand up, because he was talking about owning it for yourself, but also owning it for the community. And so you guess, we're at Kildonan, how many percentage do you think of the people stood up? 100%. Oh, probably about 90%. And so I remember he was sitting there and I gave him a little nudge. nudge. I said, look back behind you. And then something amazing happened. He stood up. And that was like the start of something so amazing. And from that point on, he has actually advocated for himself. He actually went on TV at 10 years old and advocated, and Harvey Hubble, he Skyped and gave some cues on what to do and telling him and supporting him what to do. But that's exactly it. That's empowerment. We can do something. We can change something that's not right. And to me, that is amazing. And I'm so glad that so many students are here from Kildonan, because I'm going to grab some of you, because you know what? Your voice is the most important. It's not necessarily my voice. It's your voice. It holds so much power. So let's move on. Maybe not the other side. It's working in the living room. Okay, so we'll just click it old fashioned. Maybe? No? Someone help? So while you're doing that, we have an annual tweet. New York, at Kildonan, want to tweet it out for you, or taking care of technical difficulties? What do you tweet? Pound DD New York at Kildonan. Right there on the slide right there. Oh, no, that's right. Pound DD New York at AT Kildonan.
What else? You have an actual computer sign.
That's great. No pressure. No pressure.
Oh, yeah.
You want to start over? Just start again.
You want me to start from the very beginning? So we were here talking to Ben Fox. We were here. Okay.
Well, that's not working yet. What is it?
Now where do I go?
You have to start from scratch. It's an opportunity.
Yeah, it's just repeat and line.
Anyone have a little filler song? Thing like this is filler? Others?
Let's see if it goes. Here we go.
So I'm gonna move forward. It's okay, perfect.
It's coming.
It's thinking? Searching? Okay, so while that's thinking, so right now it's coding dyslexia. How many states do you think we have on board?
30.
45.
52.
71.
Who's the math tutor around here?
48.
50 states. Every state's on board. Every state's on board. But what does that mean? What does that tell us? It means that there's a need. There's a voice that needs to be spoken and action needs to take place. We also have 3 Canadian provinces.
One in like Florida and South Carolina.
Yes? Yes. There we go. And I want to talk about something that's really important. And a lot of times when we're pushing for change, we're pushing some buttons. And there's one thing that I want to talk about. decoding dyslexia in Unity, but especially in New York, we think that teachers are the greatest resource. I mean, think of the impact they have on the students that they touch and teach. But we also know we have limited time, money, resources, and energy, and we must push for empowering teachers with that professional development so that all kids can be taught like the students at Children's. So I wanted just to talk to help you understand a little bit about our mission and what we're going for and what we try to keep in touch with. But one of them is to raise dyslexia awareness. So we go out to the community, we meet with schools, we do dyslexia simulations, we meet with legislators to tell people about dyslexia and what it is. I was recently giving at my son's school a dyslexia simulation, and at the end I did a survey, and on the survey I asked, what did you learn? Teachers. And they said, I learned that you don't read backwards. These are teachers in our school. So we know what we know, we don't know what we don't know. Another thing I heard on the survey was, it's so sad to hear how many people have dyslexia. To me, it means, oh man, I didn't get it. I didn't tell them how amazing this is, how amazing dyslexia is, if they're given that appropriate instruction. We also really aim to empower families and teachers in giving them the right resources to help their children or their students. The last thing I want to do is have a family go through the hopelessness that I felt or what I see other families face. So we really work on this. And by the way, this isn't our job. We don't get paid for this. It's kind of like something in our soul and heart has changed in this journey, and we do this because we're impassioned to do it. We are determined. We will make a change. No buts about it. And then also working with policymakers on the best practices so we can identify, instruct, and support students that have dyslexia. Now this is something I added. I'm going to mispronounce this, but I'm going to give it the best effort. It's a Latin term, and it's an oath taken in the medical field. And I believe that it has a home in the education field. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. And I'm going to mean that, I'm talking about that in two separate ways. One, when I advocate for my own child, when I'm working on their own education plan, does that IEP, does that education cause harm? And then also when we work on our advocacy in decoding dyslexia in New York, is the legislation we're pushing, could that cause harm? Is the information I'm giving to a legislator, is it correct? Could that cause damage? So we're really extremely cautious when we look at this, when we advocate for our own children, but also when we're advocating for change. This is what we want. We want a universal definition and understanding of dyslexia in the New York State Education Code. Why? I think the beginning of wisdom is calling things by the right name. And it's unbelievable how many times I will hear from parents, they won't let me say the D word. Dyslexia doesn't exist. And that's a shame. So we're really looking at trying to have that in education code and a definition. We want to empower teachers with teacher training. And it's warning signs, appropriate intervention strategies based on evidence, science, and practicum. We want identification to happen early on with the early screening and tests. Had many of us in this room been identified with dyslexia earlier, would that have made your life a little bit easier? Yes? No?
I was diagnosed earlier.
How old?
I was in third grade when I got diagnosed, so I think that's really helped just because I've always had.
Can I ask you a question before third grade? You were having difficulty.
Yeah.
You didn't know you had dyslexia, right? How was that? Was that difficult?
I mean,
a difficult period?
it was. I did a good job of hiding it, but like the fear like you have when they're having everyone read something out loud and you can barely get through a sentence is something I won't forget.
You feel different. You're like, what's wrong with me?
You need to take him, say that exact statement to the legislators.
One of the things when my son was first identified, I'm going to get to you next, I promise. One of the things was a couple teachers said, don't tell your son he has dyslexia. He might feel bad. And I thought about it for a second. I heard what they said, but you know what? I think he was already feeling bad. I think he kind of already knew that something was up. And I gave that trouble a name to him. He could understand that. But I also told him how amazing it is. And I brought him to see Ben Foss, and I introduced him to other people that have dyslexia. Because the last thing you want to think, and this is human nature, is, it's just me? I'm the only one? That's not a good feeling for us human beings. It's just part of human nature. Would you agree? Oh, question you had, I want to say.
I was just going to say I got diagnosed last year.
Okay, how old are you?
I was in 8th grade.
8th grade. And did you kind of think that you had dyslexia? What did you think the troubles were?
I had a feeling that something was up.
Something was up. You knew?
I knew from the beginning I could try to.
Can I ask you a question? This is a serious question, because my son felt this way, and I want to ask, did you feel when we didn't know you had dyslexia, like, something's wrong with you, I'm dumb, I'm not smart? Did you think that way? You didn't think that way. You felt that way.
I was held back in the first grade as a result of part of my diagnosis.
Okay.
Because I just didn't think that I couldn't make it to the next grade. But I just can't understand to this day, how do you hold a child back in the first grade? You can't. Like that is literally one of the simplest grades to get through, and yet they still feel that they can hold you back. And even then, after I got picked up, they would give me A's, but then in the fine print, they would say I'm doing awful. And that was the worst feeling that I had ever experienced in my time.
Does anyone else ever felt that experience?
I was held like 3 years in kindergarten. I was dyslexic and nobody knew what was going on with me. So grade 3 and everyone knew I was dyslexic, and I tried to like other countries like I was dyslexia.
So let me ask, I'm hearing a lot of the same consensus. So what do we want to do about it? Are you guys upset? Do you want to change something? Or do you want the next generation of kids to feel exactly what you felt?
I don't want to see my children.
What's that?
I said I don't want to see my children. It won't happen.
That's exactly right. And then assistive technology, having access to appropriate assistive technology, we're pushing for that. But not just access to it, because sometimes we find that students can have access to it, but the teacher's like, okay, now what do I do with this? How do I use this? I mean, we've had students that have had a computer, but they don't know actually how to use it every day in the classroom, which is a shame. You like that? I did that like late last night. I hope you guys are doing that. So I want to talk about advocacy. And there's a couple different advocacy, types of advocacy that I'm talking about. One is individual advocacy, or for your child. And you're looking at learning as much as you can, right? So you can help yourself or someone that you love in your family. You know the laws to protect you. You learn as much as you can to do that. You know the science and practicality behind obtaining the correct instruction. I mean, we do know, right, that the way you're learning to read, it's based on science. Science. And then know how the system and the players work. Now, this is something I'm still learning, by the way. But knowing what the constraints are when you're working with the school, why won't they provide something? And then become part of the community. Join forces and collaborate. I love collaborating with Learning Ally and other organizations that we have this common goal in Kildonan. So it's that. There's individual advocacy. And before you go into like a societal advocacy, you know what you need to do? You need to take care of yourself and a loved one. Has anyone flown a plane before? What do they tell you? They say put that oxygen mask on you first, and then if you have little ones or more than one, you choose your favorite child. Or the one with the most potential. Or if your husband has trouble, then you put it on him too. But this is really important because we have people that want to advocate, but right now they might be going through a hearing, or they are so consumed in fighting to get their child an appropriate education. And it's not just an education, but there's this. There's this little heart and soul sometimes that really gets broken, and anxiety hits, and it is the worst feeling when you hear a parent call crying, or you see a child's eyes with despair that they have to go to the school again every day. Adults, have you ever had a job you didn't like? A boss you didn't like?
Yeah.
Could you imagine going into that job every single day and they always told you you're not trying hard enough? They didn't give you the tools to do your job. They asked for a PowerPoint presentation, but they didn't give you a computer. I mean, that's the same thing that a lot of our kids experience. So once you put on an oxygen mask, there's some people, and I think there's a lot of students here, I believe, that want to make a difference. There's a social advocacy for the betterment of the society. So we want to influence social change. And when we look at that, we're working with policymakers. I don't know if decoding dyslexia would have been able to be as a rapid movement as it is now, or as successful if we didn't have social media, Facebook and Twitter. I really don't believe that that would have been possible years back. Educational support events empower others. Empower not just the students, but other parents on how they can advocate for themselves and for the cause. And also, I'm taking this course through New York State. It's New York State Partners in Policy, and they're teaching us advocacy methods to work with policymakers. So there's being an advocate, but there's also being a diplomat. You're wearing the hat of dyslexia. And then engage in community, and I will say this again, because this is near and dear to my heart, cause no harm, ever. And these are often very much correlated, intertwined together. I put this one up for Wendy because she is a vegetarian. And before you say, that's not right, I have a legal notice here. No elephants were injured, eaten, hurt, or have been displaced with decoding dyslexia in New York's advocacy efforts. It's simply a metaphor, and I'll tell you. And yes, we have a sense of humor, and no, for a grassroots movement, we do not have a legal department. So, I feel like what we have to do is like eating an elephant. And it's impossible to eat an elephant. But the more people we have, we can start eating it. And we might not accomplish eating that all in 1 month or 2 months, but we're slowly, or rapidly, depending on how you want to look at it, starting to make some progress and change. So I want to just break that down a little bit and talk about some of these efforts that we are doing. But I want to throw that out a question to you first. Magic wand. I want you to think of 3 things in regards to advocacy and dyslexia that you would personally like to see changed. Can I ask?
And colleges should start to train teachers appropriately in pre-service training. We're beginning of that.
So at the university level, teacher training.
The public school system gets better at teaching dyslexia.
So students can be taught appropriately in the public education setting.
There's this mechanism against dyslexia.
Oh, you're dyslexic? Oh, like do you read everything backwards? Like I've heard that countless times. Or like, oh, you're dyslexic? Like, do you know how to read? That's true. There's somebody, an acquaintance, there's not so much an acquaintance anymore, came up to me and my son was there, she said, he doesn't look like he has dyslexia. I wanted to I control myself, but there is, that is spreading awareness. Anyone else? What would you like to change? If you had a magic wand. What's that? So what we just had is actually what we're pushing for, which actually goes and correlates to our goals and mission statement. And we bring this up when we have some meetings sometimes. And it's funny, we did this at our support group that Dr. Curley had started in regards to dyslexia, and there was very, very similar comments that we had just heard. And it really comes down to this: improving the quality of life. So let's talk a little bit about legislation in regards to dyslexia for New York. We have pending legislation right now in the Assembly. So Assemblywoman Simon has sponsored this legislation, and it's for teacher training. I talked to Assemblywoman actually this morning because I asked that she would give a public statement about this and tell us exactly where this is. And right now it's in the Assembly. They are concerned because there is not funding to mandate this bill. So that's been a long-term issue because this isn't the first go-around with this bill. And they are bringing it to Assembly, but they do have support. So we're still, will it get passed this year? I don't think so, but maybe if we all work together to try to push this through and call our Assembly people and senators. We don't have a person right now to sponsor in the Senate. And Kathleen probably loves this slide right here on ELA scores. And I'm not going to go into Common Core testing. But we do see a difference in testing with students that have dyslexia versus the normal readers. And it is a great concern if we even look at graduation rates. They're astounding. And it's not just that this legislation that we want will help students with dyslexia. There's an issue with literacy for everybody. We can do better. So it's not just looking to help students with dyslexia. I mean, if we look at NAEP, the National Assessment of Education Progress, we're looking at 4th grade, 63% are not at proficiency levels. 8th grade, 65% are not at grade level. Do you know which state has the highest per student for spending? One of the highest states? It's New York. We get an A for spending. I'm in business. Let me tell you, if I brought these numbers back to my boss, I'd probably be fired. And we really have to think about this literacy deficit for all, everyone, particularly people with dyslexia, because we are going to be parents, we are going to have kids, we pay taxes, and it is a societal issue. There's a lot of talk right now about education in New York, right? About Common Core, etc. I think that's a great thing. I think that finally we're starting to open up the communication and people are really getting upset and pushing for change. But I often think of this right here. What do you think generations will think of us right now in our education system? What will they think of the actions we took in New York or in the US? Or what will they think of the inaction we took? I mean, think 10 years from now, when they look back, are we still going to have these numbers? And it's just a provocative question, but what will they think? This is a little bit about the bill and some of the sponsors that we have in the Assembly for A 4330. And guess what? We have passed in the Senate a resolution for Dyslexia Awareness Month in October. And this kind of little sneaky thing I did, we actually put in the definition of dyslexia and what the intervention we want, and we had it passed in the Senate. So I'm hoping that when the bill gets passed and everyone says no, but you agreed to this. And in October, we're having Dyslexia Awareness Month. We're actually looking for a legislation day. And I would love, my goal is to have 100 people or more and wearing red or a color. And I'll tell you why, visually why I would think like a color. We were once having a meeting with an assembly person, and there was people with construction on the roads, and they were all wearing these neon orange colors. And they were all over the place. What are they here? And I saw like a month later all this legislation that was passed for them because they came out in powers of numbers. And visually, you could see who they were and what they were there for. So we will be getting a date out in October, and we really hope that we can be part of this change. And why? We met with the chair for the Senate and the chair for education in the Senate. what he told me, that under IDA, this is fine, we are covered under IDA. We do not see these issues that I'm telling him we are seeing. And he says an IEP should cover this. And if not, there's a process such as due process and hearing. Does anyone have a minimum of $10,000 in the house? What? $10,000. Anyone have a minimum of $10,000? Because that's kind of what we're going to pay to go to hearing if we get an advocate and up. Minimum. Is that right? Just think about that. $10,000 minimum to learn to read. That's crazy. Also bringing like-minded people together. Have you ever heard about the fruitcake theory? Have any of you heard of that? Does anyone like fruitcake, by the way? I always get it for Christmas. I cannot stand it. I got this off a rights law, and I really like it because the collaboration counts. So when I first started advocating for my son, I was a crazy dyslexia woman. They're like, oh God, here she comes again. They're talking about dyslexia. I was the one that brought the PowerPoint presentation into the superintendent and made him sit down and talk about dyslexia. He's probably like, we're on good terms now. I was a crazy fruitcake. But you know what? I started getting a couple people in the district. And they're like, oh, a crazy fruitcake and her friend, here they come. But you know, then we started getting about 10 people in. And they're like, we better listen. And this might have been before or after the interview that my son and I did. I can't remember. And then I'm thinking, 50 people. And all of a sudden, they're like, Mrs. Rafferty, we would like you to come in on superintendent's day and do a presentation at dyslexia simulation. We would like you to come in. So it does change, and it actually is nudging. I didn't give up. I kept going to see him every other month. I kept my phone calls. I'd send him emails. I met with the principal, and I found this champion principal. He drank the Kool-Aid. We found a grant to have a teacher train in a program. And I'll never forget, he went in and he saw the program. It's a derivative of alphabet phonics. It's called Language Foundations. It's more of a scripted program. And he went and he sat down on a couple sessions and called me and he was like, there's a science to reading. There's a science. Guess what he has a master's in? Anyone want to guess? Reading. He's got a master's in reading. And he gets it. And that has been a champion that has helped our district. We brought now a couple districts together where they're actually paying for a 2-day training for free for New York State education, for any New York State certified teacher, which I do have some information about. Margie Gillis is coming from Literacy House, which we're really excited about. So the fruitcake theory, it counts. And that's why I'm thinking 100 people wearing red coming into to meet with the Assembly person or Senate. Another thing that we've been doing is, and you can't really see what that says, but it's a do something meeting. And remember how I said we're grassroots and we don't have a legal department? We don't have a marketing department either, so we call it a do something meeting because we were giving a seminar at one of these reading centers, a Different Way in Reading Center. And the question and answer period, remember, was, this is crazy. We need to, what is being done about this? We need to do something. I said, yeah. What do you want to do? How do you want to walk away from here? So we set up these do something meetings. And at the end of the meeting, everyone has an action item that they choose to do, and they do something, and we eat that elephant slowly but surely. And one thing was mind-blowing to me the last meeting we had, and I'm sorry if this sounds silly to some of the students here. There was a 9th grader in the meeting, and he was so interesting. He had so many interesting ideas on how to advocate in social media. And it occurred to me, like, here we are, us parents doing this. This is silly. Who's the most powerful voice? Who's so smart? Who's the next generation? We actually need to bring in the people that are sitting right here, you students, into this. You need to own it and feel part of that as well, too, because decoding dyslexia is not a person. It's not a committee. You don't need to have a membership. You don't have to pay dues. It's actually this movement, this strong, strong movement that we're pushing for. go in to do dyslexia simulations. We'll go in to do Dyslexia 101. Working on grants, helping them, knowing what their constraints are, and finding grants and money to help them train teachers to help students. This is the training that I was talking about, that our school is working with another school and paying Margie Gillis to come here for 2 days for this amazing training. So if you're a New York teacher, New York State teacher, certified teacher, you're able to come to this. We have this on our website as well. And we're working on other trainings through different reading centers as well too. Social media, did you guys tweet yet about the event? And guess what? We had this meeting where we were working on the simulation. I had this idea. There's never been really anything with Guinness Book of World Records except for reading that had to do with dyslexia. So I put in an application to have the most amount of people celebrating dyslexia, which I think would be so empowering. So we have 7 months for this application to go through, but it's not been done before. I vetted it out. So keep an eye open for that. I think that would be spectacular. And then our idea bucket, and maybe we might have some volunteers that might want to help us with this. I said we're working on October Dyslexia Awareness Month. Some of the things that we have in place, and if you're interested or want to talk, a Dine for Dyslexia. You have a reading center or a tutor or a school working with restaurants, so a percentage of that goes to dyslexia. We have flyers on the table so they can find out about some facts about dyslexia. I had already talked about the legislative day, having a social media event in October, a letter tree postcard so we can rock out some letters and emails to legislators, and doing a powerhouse of some community dyslexia simulation that month. Also, is Gina here? She left her pictures in here. We also are looking to get, if there's anyone that is might be really good at this, but we want to have the faces of dyslexia, because they say that a face resonates with people. It tells 1,000 words just by looking at someone's eyes or face. So we're looking at trying to compile a list of all of these amazing people that have dyslexia into this video that we can put on social media, but also send to legislators. And that is my portion. I have Deborah Lyman, who's next, that is going to tell you a little bit about the creation. It's a really interesting story about Dakota Dyslexia, New Jersey. And then she's going to flip on her other hat of woman hat. Thank you.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson. Unfortunately, it's not going to contain any lions, but it will contain a train. And what I will say is, has anybody here ever visited Memphis, Tennessee? No? Well, my family just got back from Memphis. We were there on our spring break, and we spent some time going through the National Civil Rights Museum. And this was the Lorraine Motel where Dr. Martin Luther King was shot and killed. And they've transformed this motel into a national museum to celebrate the African American history of their civil rights movement. And I actually was there with a Dakota Dyslexia Tennessee member, and we went through this museum with our families together. And when I got out, I was just reflecting on this movement that we've started about literacy instruction and dyslexic rights and things like that. So I'm here to share something with you that, who knows, maybe in the future when you have families yourself and you're a bit older, we might look back on this presentation here today and say, like, this is when I first started to learn about this movement for dyslexia and literacy in the United States. So keep that in mind as you hear this little bit of a story about the journey of this movement. So in New Jersey, it started before the concept of Dakota Dyslexia. We had one mom, Beth Ravelli, and her daughter Samantha that lived in southern New Jersey, and her daughter was in 3rd grade at the had his job, and one of the children stayed with him, and she moved so that she could put her daughter in this other school district that had some multisensory structured language interventions going on. And she set out on this journey, and she was contacting every legislator that she could get a meeting with. And finally, one senator from her county, Senator Van Drew, took up her cause and found some other legislator constituents that he was able to work with, and they started working on dyslexia legislation in the state of New Jersey. One mom, one child, one senator, one child. It took 8 years to move legislation. And this was one mom faithfully plugging away. She would introduce comprehensive legislation, and it wouldn't move. She would try a smaller bill, and it would die and go nowhere. So finally, they decided to try this concept of putting forward a dyslexia and a reading disabilities task force for the state of New Jersey. They didn't want to touch dyslexia, but they would go so far as to say a New Jersey reading disabilities task force. So that's the bill that ultimately had some legs and was able to be passed into law. So that bill was introduced in December 2008. That was after a few years of her really trying to get other bills introduced prior. It was signed into law January 2010, and the task force was finally established in July 2011. At the same time that this was happening, we, as a group of parents in New Jersey, were experiencing the same kinds of struggles with our own kids in districts all throughout the state. And in October 2011, there was one father who lived in southern New Jersey who was sending his child to a private school, and he had sponsored an event to go to New York City to hear a speaker on dyslexia through the National Center for Learning Disabilities. So through his generosity, he reached out to some friends that he had in the state. There were about 8 of us, and he offered to have us come with him to this luncheon because he had purchased a table and he wanted us to enjoy this event with him. So we all went up from New Jersey up to New York City on a train, had this lovely lunch, we're chit-chatting, talking, and we started realizing that we all had the same story, right? We were all different parents from different parts of the state. You know, I and a few others had children that were in public school. There were some families that were paying for private school. There were some parents that had fought their district and got their district to pay for private schools. So all different demographics and settings and unique family setups. But we all basically had the same story. But it was too darn hard, right? We felt like we were the only ones, and we didn't know anybody else, and we were out there on our own. And by the time we took that train ride home, we all just said to ourselves, you know, we are stuck in this mindset of, you know, failure. Children have to cross this mindset of they have to wait to fail, right? Our public education system says not until they cross that threshold are we going to do anything about it, right? We're not going to step in early and try to prevent anything or do anything differently until we see some real problems there. And what we were seeing was that interventions that were offered to dyslexic students, they were really generic. They were uninformed, or they were non-existent, and they were just these programs that weren't really helping our children fulfill their potential, and the teachers didn't really have a lot of knowledge base about what would be used in place of them. So again, same story over and over again. So we basically said, what if? What if someone did something? What if someone stepped forward and tried to unite parents in the state of New Jersey? Could we make a difference? Could we get the ball rolling? Could we maybe even support some of the work that was happening with this disability task force? So this is actually the very, very first meeting of Decoding Dyslexia, and it was in November of 2011. So it took us a few weeks. We started at a local public library. The people that were on that train attended. This picture was taken by a representative from Learning Ally, and he kind of chronicled it. We were like so happy he was there because we wouldn't have thought to take a picture. But this was the very first meeting. And from there, I can tell you, we were winging this thing. We got kicked out of that room because the knitting club was going to use it the next month. And then finally, we were thinking like, okay, maybe we should meet at people's houses. And then Learning Ally came forward and they offered us some free meeting space in their headquarters in Princeton. So that sort of became our meeting place, and it was in central New Jersey, so it was really perfect because people from north and south had equal access. We started meeting and we were like, oh, we need to come up with, you know, a little logo for ourselves, and I'm a former graphic designer, we had some marketing people in the group, and we're like, okay, we're going to do this through social media, so let's give it some pizzazz, and we designed a logo. what would really happen. We were totally focused on New Jersey. So what we first did, and this is our first objective, was that's Beth Ravelli there on the left-hand side, your right-hand side. She was that lone mom that had been at it for like 8 years. So some of us knew her not so well, but a little bit. So we connected with her immediately, and we said, we are going to help with this reading disability task force. Because what we had learned through some of our just investigative work is that like everyone wasn't doing anything. It was meeting occasionally, and the government really wasn't supporting it. They didn't give it the legislative aid that was supposed to be there to be taking notes and all of that stuff. So we kind of knew it was something that was being brushed under the carpet. So our first point of direction was to bring attention to this reading disability task force. So we started contacting newspapers and just everybody that we could talk about. We basically thought we're going to shame them into putting out a really good report, and they are going to be embarrassed if they come forward with these recommendations that are really worthless. So we just flooded their email boxes, we contacted newspapers and had stories run. We did everything we could to get the word out. And then finally, they had enough pressure that they decided to have a public hearing. And they were going to invite parents and professionals to come in to Trenton at the Capitol and take testimony from people. And you know, in the way that DOEs do these kind of things, they put the announcement up on the DOE website because everybody goes to their state DOE website to learn about, you know, where we need to do legislatively. So we blasted that out through social media. They gave us a little tiny meeting room and 2 hours, and everyone had 3 minutes to come in and talk, and we packed the room. Tina Marie from Pennsylvania, she came herself and she said, well, I can't testify because I don't live in New Jersey, but I'm documenting this for you. So she videotaped all of the testimony that day. And that testimony, I would say 96% of it was specific to dyslexia. So they didn't want to touch the word, but we made them face it. We had professionals, we had parents, we had students. It was the most powerful night. I mean, there were tears flowing in that room. And I will tell you, it went an hour and 45 minutes past the scheduled time. They had, what, 160 people registered, over 100 testified, and we were lining the room and sitting in the aisle. They were not prepared for what turned out. And we looked at each other after that event and we were like, okay, we're on to something here. Something's happening. So the task force actually put out a very strong report. It had excellent recommendations for what needed to be going on in our state related to reading disabilities, and it was specific to dyslexia. It couldn't have been clearer that the overwhelming response that they got while they were doing their investigative work is that when we're talking about reading disabilities, we are talking about dyslexia. So those recommendations were, in addition to doing the stuff in New Jersey, while we were in the process of doing all that work, we also realized that it was important to start legislating at the national level. So you can see this is like 2 separate trips up to DC, and we had our children came with us, and we would meet with everybody's specific legislator, and we would pack the rooms, and it was really the start of making this a topic even at the federal level. And we've gone back to DC every year since then. We have another trip coming up in July, and it's open to all 50 states, and it's been growing and growing every year with more people joining us down there. But this is what happened with those recommendations. So those 6 task force recommendations that came out in the form of a report were also introduced as bills by one of the legislators that was involved with the task force legislation. And those were introduced in December 2012, and we had a big ceremonial signing, and our families and our kids were there. And it was really exciting, and I really felt powerful to introduce your kids to that democratic process and feeling like you were a part of it. So 6 bills resulted in 3 laws in the state of New Jersey. In 2013, we had a professional development law which passed. It wasn't very strong. I will say that the bills went through a little bit of a process. They got beat up. So there were some groups in the state that had some opposition to some of the really good wording that was in there, and by the time they made their way through the whole process, they were a little less aggressive than we would want them to be. So the professional development law originally asked for, I believe it was 10 hours of professional development every year. When it finally got passed, we got 2. So 2 hours of professional development every year in New Jersey for a whole family of teachers. A definition of dyslexia in the law, and we chose the IDA definition. And dyslexia is street law. Originally, this is the one that was really a heartbreak, because originally it was introduced showing the potential indicators would be put into an intervention immediately. Wow, did this hit opposition. Groups really didn't understand that we were basically talking about like a response model, like universal screening, and let's get some interventions in place. But they just thought it was atrocious. How dare we ask for every child to be screened for reading? So by the time that one made it through, it basically now says every child that shows the potential indicators must be screened by the first semester of second grade. A little ridiculous in my opinion, because how do you know who has the potential indicators? You screen to find that out. So it's a little bit silly, but we're going to take care of that through how we implement. And we're really on a rampage right now to make sure that we are getting these things implemented well. So after the laws were passed, we kind of shifted our focus towards implementation. So we had made a lot of connections during our lobbying work, and as soon as those bills passed, we got connections with the Department of Education, and we went right back in there and we said, great, now we have this teacher training law and this screening bill. What are we going to do? How are we going to implement these? And we decided that we were going to spend, and this was with our special ed director of the state and our literacy director of the state, and we decided that we were going to spend 2 to 3 years on awareness, that the knowledge base in New Jersey was so low that we couldn't dive right into like, oh, go get training in an Orton-Gillingham-based approach or a structured language approach, that we really needed to get people to buy into this because 2 hours a year wasn't going to do it. We had to convince them that it was the right thing to do so that they would go on their own to continue this work and training. So we connected, the Decoding Dyslexia group connected the Department of Education to Dr. Gordon Sherman and Dee Rosenberg, who I think have spoken here before at your training, your workshop series, as well as the organization that I work for, Learning Ally, and we worked with the Department of Education to put together a 3-hour, actually after hearing from us, the Department of Education said, oh, let's make it 3 hours, 2 hours is not enough. So they worked with us over the course of that year to build a training module to really introduce schools and teachers to dyslexia, and it's just a basic overview. I would call it Dyslexia 101. That's basically what it is. And we funded it for 3 trainings throughout the state that first year as a pilot, and myself and Dee Rosenberg, we were in doing the trainings, and they were sponsored at the Department of Education's Learning Centers, so it just felt great to have this partnership. And we trained about 200, maybe 250 teachers that first year. And then the next year, the DOE came out and they actually funded opportunities for this training. The DOE funded them. So Learning LA and the New Grange Education Center, which is Dr. Gordon Sherman and Dee Rosenberg, we went in and did trainings in, actually they're going on right now, in the Learning Resource Centers again. But instead of them being that 3-hour training that we had done the year before, the Department of Education now asked for 3 days of training in the 3 centers. So what we put together was a plan to have school districts put teams together. So it would be a special educator, a literacy expert, and an administrator from each school district would come together as a team, and they would attend a 3-day workshop that's spaced out over a span of a few weeks. And what was required was that they go back to their district and do, a little introspective work, and then come back for the second session, talk about some changes they could make. So really, we're watching these partnerships grow and evolve. And our New Jersey branch of the International Dyslexia Association, they were funded to do archived webinars that are going to live on our Department of Education's website. So really, really great partnerships are starting to happen. It is not perfect in New Jersey. Please do not let me leave with you thinking, oh, everything's working great in New Jersey. But these are the steps. The door is opened. Every day at my job at Learning Ally, I am getting calls from teachers and educators that want to know more, and that's fantastic. Discussions are starting on the screening mandate. I would tell you, our Department of Education, they need to build their own knowledge base. So we're working with them to understand screening protocols and what that means, and what we're hoping for is perhaps they'll put out some type of handbook or guidance document that districts will find very helpful. But you'll see, it's all about partnerships, and we're building connections, and we're trying to get people talking so that the people that have the expertise can be guiding our Department of Education. Presently, we have 2 bills that are in the hopper, and those are, one is for an assistive technology pilot program, so that the state would fund a few districts to test out some assistive technology tools, and then we also have a bill in that would require the Department of Education to sponsor a dyslexia resource website. So, we have to start shifting those mindsets, right? All of those stories that we all shared on that train ride, we need to get the message out now, and I thought that Emerson was going to be here today, my friend from New Jersey, and I have channeled some information that I've learned from Emerson over the years. Dyslexia is a neurobiological condition, and this is what it means. It can be affected over time. We can make things better. We can have our children learning to read. We have to do it. Yes?
Sorry, Ms. Lennon. So a number of students have to go on to the next activity. Some may have found a way to still stay. Before they go, really quickly, you all have accomplished so much as adults and parents working in this field. If you had these folks with you, you'd have Andrew Cuomo shouting dyslexia from the top of the head.
I know.
So how can all the teenagers in this room get involved in this movement?
You need to get connected to Debbie over here, and I'm sorry, with Barbara, and Melissa, and Wendy, and you need to talk to them and find out how you can best help decoding dyslexia in New York. Because a child's voice, that is what we've seen move mountains. Every time, those pictures I put up there, every time we were at our steakhouse, we had kids in those seats, and we had kids at that microphone, and it made a difference.
Yeah, a huge difference. Thank you, students, for expressing. Everyone else being said.
So again, we know dyslexia is a condition that affects it is a moral imperative. It really is.
You guys. Problem.
It is a
They're on series.
So I will be doing this again for my grandkids and my great-grandkids if something doesn't change now. So it really is all of our utmost responsibility to speak up now and keep this momentum going. So Debbie has given a really quick overview of the nonprofit organization that I work for. It's a national nonprofit and it's based in New Jersey. It's called Learning Ally. It was formerly called Reporting for the Blind and Dyslexic, for those of you who may be familiar with that. And it was providing audio assistive technologies. But in the last few years, I joined on about 2 years ago, and they went through a real transformation. They've done a very big ethnographic study to look at the dyslexic population of their membership to see what were their real needs. Like they knew the audience were what they really need to have these students reach success. And what they found was really shocking to them. I think we all know it, but to the leaders of this organization, it was shocking that it was taking over 3 years for families to get their kids into the supportive services that they need, from the point that the parent thought the child was struggling to when those services were put in place. And, you know, I looked at that study and I'm like, yep, that's about right. That's about right. But to them, they were like, oh my gosh, we have to do something to shorten that time frame for families so that when they feel that their child is struggling and is having problems, how can we as a nonprofit organization help them get to those resources faster? So I'm the director of community engagement here. When I first came on board, my task was to help build out the parent services because they wanted to move beyond just the audiobooks. So we have a little philosophy at Learning Ally, and it is remediation plus accommodation plus a champion is what equals success for a student. And we really work on building champions at Learning Ally, whether that be a teacher, a parent, or the student themselves. That's what I see as my mission. When I go to work every day, I'm trying to empower champions for our kids. We have parent support specialists on staff. Actually, all 4 of them are different dyslexia members, 2 from New Jersey, 1 from Arizona, and 1 from California. And we have an 800 number, and you can call and have just questions answered, general support calls, or you can have a real consultation done. They've all been trained in advocacy. They come from backgrounds where they've been doing this work already. 2 of them were doing it for their local IDA branch. So they're on staff to talk to families, and we do these consultations every day of the week, and they're really tremendous. We also do webinars and events. We have parent and educator webinar series. The one thing that's not up here is we have teacher professional development around the dyslexia awareness as well as assistive technology. We also do a lot of virtual that attended online. Most of the people stayed more than 6 hours on their computer at this conference. It was really phenomenal. So we do a lot of work on just building that sense of community and getting people together to share information and gain knowledge. We have an Ask a Parent forum on our website where parents can ask questions of that parent support team and you can get online responses. And we also have a very active Facebook parent chat. It's over 1,600 people, and these are parents that are helping each other every day. The level of information that is being shared in there has blown away all of the people that work in our organization. It is parents giving very detailed information about reading programs and, who's a good neuropsychologist in their local area. It's just the value of what's going on in that chat is amazing. We also have specialist directories when you go to our website. So if you're a parent that's looking for a professional evaluation for your child, you can put in your zip code, and we have a directory of specialists that we have partnerships with, and you can go there and look to get some evaluations. We also have just launched a reading tutor network, and these are all tutors that are specific to dyslexic needs. So they're trained in structured language approaches, Wharton-Gillingham-based approaches. So really, parents are calling us all the time, and they've been looking for these resources, and sometimes we can't find them, people, like 4 hours from where they live. So the birth of these types of things came about, and that's what we're actively doing now. We're reaching out to organizations and individuals and asking them to come and be a part of these specialist directories so that we have great resources for families. We also have been building out youth services in addition to the stuff for parents. So we have student-to-student webinars and different events. These usually happen every other month, where we have students that will host a webinar for other students, and they're really well attended. And believe it or not, the most active part of those webinars are the chat boxes. And you would think, oh my gosh, we didn't think we would need that functionality. We were thinking, were the kids going to get on there and type and all of this stuff? And I think they're just so free because they know nobody cares about your spelling in the chat room. But they're really having a lot of fun in those. We have a family newsletter that goes out every other month. We have text tips. You can sign your kids up to get text messages from kids that are just like inspirational quotes and little things to keep them going. We have a youth ambassador program. It is currently in Colorado, and it's called the Yes Ambassador Program. And basically, it is high school students that act as mentors for upper elementary and middle school students. And it's a year-long program, and the students go through a mentorship program, and there are 4 different events, and it's building skills towards self-advocacy. We are going to be branching that out in New Jersey this summer, and then soon to follow will be Massachusetts. And once we do those pilot programs, we'll be looking for places to launch that across the country. And we have the 1 in 5 initiative. It was launched about a year ago, and basically it's a website where kids can come and they can blog, they can post videos. We are revamping that at the moment, and it's going to become a place for youth services. There are going to be all kinds of videos on there, kid-to-kid information about using assistive technologies, talking to teachers, how best tips for homework. It's going to be a totally student-friendly website. We have a National Achievement Award program. We have 6 scholarships that we give out every year, 3 for learning disabilities and 3 on the blind and visually impaired side. And these are for students who are in college, and they're nice awards to give out every year. And we also have the audiobooks, which we're known for. We have a library of over 80,000 human narrated titles, and we're really we are excited about that human narrated part, so that the kids are hearing a human read that story with the correct pronunciation of words and prosody and all of that inflection, as opposed to some of the synthetic voices that are out there on things. And that's at the end of my presentation.
thing about it like this is everybody's taught the same way and people, kids are their peers, right? So I thought I saw New Jersey had some of these special schools where kids with learning disabilities, dyslexia. Right, basically dyslexia. You didn't mention it in fact.
Yeah, New Jersey has private LD schools also.
Private schools.
We have state, yeah, there are schools that might be called state approved, and it just means that they're approved. They're approved. Yeah, it's not. But I will say, because both of my boys have been educated in their public schools. And I have, my son is a junior in high school, and he is completely remediated, and he is in honors English classes. He takes the AP history classes. So it can be done. It takes a real champion to push. I tell you, I said I was a graphic designer in my previous life. I now feel like I'm a full-time advocate, but it can be done. My younger son has remained in public schools also. He gets a replacement language arts program, so he does get pulled out of the general education classroom for 90 minutes a day to receive Gordon-Gillingham-based programming for reading, writing, and spelling and handwriting. But he is back in his regular education class with assistive technologies for all of the grade level content in science, social studies, math, gym, art, all of that, and it's working well for us. So it can happen, but it really takes a dedicated parent and a school district that's willing to work on, building those programs.
I had a question also, a New Jersey question. When is the state legislature, getting the pushback, say on PD going from how many hours to 2 hours, who's doing the pushing of all of those things?
Yeah, we have the teachers union, the school principals and administrators association, and the school boards association. They were the three main groups that really got in there and wanted to pull everything apart. I will say the legislative process is very frustrating because literally that stuff happens behind the scenes, and we would be showing up to testify for bills that we assumed said one thing, and you'd show up that day and the wording was completely changed. And you have to make a split decision. Are we testifying for this, or do we now oppose it? And we decided that the best approach was, since it had been such a long journey in New Jersey, and we had finally gotten to the point where we thought there was a possibility this would pass, we decided to go for it and support even the altered legislation, because that's what it's done for us in New Jersey. It has opened a door, and now it's all about implementation and making sure that we are bringing great opportunities for learning into the state. And that's what my organization, Learning Ally, has been doing up and down the state. We're doing the same thing. Dyslexia simulations in partnership with the Decoding Dyslexia New Jersey group. We are bringing trainers in the Orton-Gillingham Academy. I always say that, the Academy of Orton-Gillingham practitioners and educators. We've had 30 hours training of teachers coming in and doing that. We have another one coming this summer. So now it's sort of about like, okay, capacity. How do we get enough opportunities going so that the teachers who now are thinking, I don't know enough, what do I do next? What's the next step? We have to be prepared for that. We're still working on the DOE. As I said, they don't have the knowledge base themselves right now, but they're open. They're open to discussions. They asked me to join their special education advisory council at the state level, so I get to go every month and meet with my director of special education and other key stakeholders. So it's a process. It's building partnerships, and you never know what conversation is going to spark something that's really fruitful, a few months or a year from now. So I just want to encourage you, if you have those laws in place, those bills in place right now, go for it. Put a lot of effort behind them. You said you weren't sure if they had a chance to pass this year or not, but don't think that way. Think that the effort that goes into it now, the momentum that you build, even if you have to go back next session with a new bill, you're building that momentum all along the way.
And actually, if I could just say about our bill too, when I say that it might not get through, that doesn't mean something that is terrible or horrific. It means that hopefully it would go into a committee like New Jersey where they could actually explore some of the issues with literacy and dyslexia. So that's kind of most likely the process that it will take. So it might not go through this year or it may, but it's actually going through that legislative process that can be very frustrating for sure.
We also have our bill that we're working on trying to advocate, and it's
inspire people. Like, okay, so think about that in New Jersey. She was working on that for 8 years, and then it took another 2 years for the task force to work and finally pass the other legislation. But what we're seeing happening now, I'm watching legislation drop in states across the country that in 6 months' time, these laws are passing. Like that's a seismic shift in how legislators are looking at this issue. And like, that's just great. It's so exciting. And I don't want states to feel discouraged if one bill does go down. Like our friends in Virginia were devastated because they had this great piece of legislation that just didn't move. It died on the floor. But they had the correct attitude. They were like, that's okay. You know what? Now we know what they're opposed to. And now we know what they're coming out in opposition to. And we know we'll be better prepared next time to deal with those concerns. So that's the mentality, and there's nothing more powerful than the parent voice and the student voice. Like, I thank you for saying that before they left, because put a student up with that microphone, and we had kids that were talking about wanting to drop out of school, and horrible stories about emotional impact and things like that. And I just could not believe that these kids would share such personal stories, but they feel like they're a part of a community that's pushing for something. It's like that Civil Rights Museum.
I just wanted to say, I've been listening, and I wanted to say, what is unique about your learning that fits into your particular perspective? And
They do what we would like our
let me
others to
finish.
do.
I'm a teacher here, and I wanted to say that what can we do to change the paradigm shift?
To be honest with you, imagine if you, as a teacher here, went, what was she saying in New York, go to the assembly and say, I make a difference every day. I know how to teach these kids. And help push that law because you know how to do it right.
So how can we do it right? What can Philomena do to present what we do, which is special here? We do something.
I say partner with Learning Ally and get it out there.
We've had these conversations before, and we bring up a really good question. And often I hear some of the best stories that teachers tell are the ones that have gone through the training because they weren't able to teach, and it was driving them crazy. They used everything in their toolbox to teach a student, and then they maybe have gone through the training of electronics or Gillingham. And I hear the story of someone from the Wings, her name is Kathy Jensen, and she has wings on the back of her back because she's amazing. It was like this light bulb went off when she was able to get that training. And when I bring her in to talk to a legislator or a school, she tells them how she couldn't teach students special education, masters in special education. She couldn't teach them. And then she says, well, I'm empowered. Now with training, I'm able to hit every student. I can teach every student 51% they can't to read. And that's the story I think would be powerful.
We had a member of our New Jersey IDA branch, a poor woman. I think we toted her around that state, and she still was willing to come when we asked her. But she would stand up there and she would say that she's so ashamed of her first 20 years of educating students because she was committing educational malpractice. And that, like, talk about the zinger, the line that could be broadcast anywhere. And then she would go on to tell about, reaching out, getting the training, and now going back. And she tells the one story of seeing a past student walking down the street in her neighborhood, and she stopped her car, and she pulled over to see how the young boy was doing it. He hadn't graduated high school, and he was kind of bouncing around. And she tutored him at her kitchen table for 3 years until he learned to read. And she said, I didn't do that out of the goodness of my heart. She said, I did that because I was ashamed that I failed him in all those years when I was an early teacher. So like those kinds of stories carry a lot of weight. I almost wish that we could get more educators into the decoding dyslexia movement because something happened when parents found each other and were able to connect and talk. And through my work at Learning Ally, I'm in school districts, I'm doing these dyslexia trainings and simulations, and it never fails. I'm staying there 30 minutes after these things, and teachers are coming up to me, and they're saying things like, yeah, but my administrator won't let me use this kind of program, or, when I get evaluated by my principal, he's saying that, I'm doing too much direct instruction, and they were like, what do we do? And I think, I can't help you. You have to go find your other educators to form this, go talk to your unions, go talk to, your school boards associations, and tell them what you need as educators. So that's like my next frontier. I know there was a couple other states that I've been talking to about that. Like, how do we get a decoding dyslexia teacher movement going so that they feel safe enough to come out and talk about these issues too? I mean, the Kildonian, come on, it is the cream of the crop. If we could get public schools to do a fraction of the work we're doing here, the stuff that I saw today blew me away. I would be happy if I could just get a fraction of that tutoring piece into my public school, quite honestly. So you should all be extremely proud of yourselves, but if you can help this movement by speaking up and saying and talking about the outcomes that you're achieving with kids.
I know, it's his problem.
We're only an hour and 15 minutes only, so we got students on the bus. Get mad on the bus. You can drive out there.
To be honest with you, that is a discussion we've had in Pennsylvania because
Business, you can come easier. You have educators all over the country now that need that professional organization to be a part of. But it's the fruitcake. It's the fruitcake theory. I believe it is. I mean, it maybe is not a direct. Yeah. Oh, I'm not saying it's easy, but by building that community, it's always easier to do it within a group as opposed to being that one person who's voice. Yeah.
One of the things we're doing in our community is we're working with superintendents and assistant superintendents. And so for this training that's coming with Margie Gillis, they're pushing this. So they're bringing it to their regional meetings. And when they are having the teachers come in, they're saying, because exactly what you say, you have a teacher who has training and they're all jazzed, like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, I've got to do this, and they're not able to do it. So we're actually asking for a team from each school to come. And we're asking them to bring some of their test data so we can go and analyze it too. So we're asking for an administrator, we're asking for someone that is a literacy specialist, a special ed, and a general ed, and more too. But we're asking for a team so they can go back all jazzed together to talk about it. Sorry, we're taking up our time.
actually, we're going to have a whole question and answer time on this, but I'm going to forget this because the conversation is too good. But I want to say this to you. In Pennsylvania, we passed a pilot program. And to be honest with you, I didn't like it. Because it was such a baby step, and I want to make the leap. And everyone keeps saying you can't do that, you can take the baby steps. So what we did is we passed a pilot program that 3 schools would do early screening and earlier intervention, 3 districts. We have 500 districts. We're doing it in 3. Well, the Department of Education decided to blow our minds and say, you know what, we're going to do 8. And we're like, yes! We are so excited. And then we went, guess what we're missing? We have no teachers that know how to do it. We do not have enough. So what we're doing is we are going to the Children's Dyslexia Centers, which are a lot in the Northeast, and we are saying to them, will you come and train our teachers? We can't get through their routine. Can't do it. So we then decided to reach out to one of the centers that closed down, and then from being amazing and reopened, and they are right. But we still don't have enough teachers. So, and here's the other thing our school district, our Department of Education said, apply. Because even if you're not chosen, we will train your teachers for free. Okay, we can't get the 8 done. What do you think we're doing about this? So not only do we have to pass legislation, but we have to get trained people. We have to build that capacity. So our Pennsylvania, being completely non-informed on this issue. They decided, we have 3 training centers in our state also, that they are going to bring in do the training. So you're going to come in today, I'm going to teach you how to do this, and tomorrow you're going to train her. Not realizing it takes a long time to get that initial certification. And then you have to go back for that trainer certification. So we're supposed to be starting this in September. Do you think we're anywhere near capacity? So we put it back down to 3. So all that excitement that, oh my goodness, they're finally hearing us. And we don't have the people to do it. So understand why you're doing this, why we're pushing legislation. There's so much more to be done.
This is also about money and all this is money. So is that the legislation?
In this situation, it wasn't.
Because in these concepts, right?
Well, in this situation, they said, we will give you the money. Here you go. We're going to give you the money. And there was nobody there to do it. There's
Do you know the teachers didn't want to be trained, or?
No.
I don't understand.
There's the people that need to train the teachers. There's not enough of them. There's not enough trained or healing hand instructors to train our teachers.
Here we are. We have Lori Rousseau in 3 years.
Let me tell
That's
you.
what
I will tell you, because we have Delaware Valley Front School. We have the Eden Academy now happening. And when you said earlier that we'll be putting you guys out of business, that has been our exact fear. Because I have a child in Delaware Valley Front School, and I am co-founder of Decoding Dyslexia. I am a dyslexia advocate. Do you think my school would put something out on their school newsletter about decoding dyslexia? Not once.
Well, we do.
Yeah, but you're not my state. No, I think it's amazing that you do that, but my school's not. And that is our only interpretation, are they afraid to help us because we'll put them out of business if this passes? Because none of them are doing it in our state. God bless you for doing it, because I think we should all be worried about the children. See, I'm all about the kids. I'm about the most eloquent. We used to joke with Devin. When they would have someone speak, we're like, Devin, do it! Because the rest of us felt so uncomfortable and awkward. But my passion's for the kids. So when we were doing this was actually a big deal for us. We did, that's the pilot. And I just put this up there. Mine's much more dry because it's all data driven. But, we're trying to get support groups. I started a support group. The first time, we couldn't find a place to sit, and I packed that room with advocates. So any parent that needed help was going to get help on the spot. The next month, we had just enough room. And the next month, we had empty seats. And the next month, I sat there for 20 minutes before everyone came, and we had neuropsychologists come in, we had special education attorneys come in. I still don't understand. I don't know how to get parents, like you guys are sitting right here. We joke around that. All of us, we all have double deficits of dyslexics, and we had to fight because no one else was going to fight for us. How to get those parents out and into these groups and doing these things. We haven't figured that out yet. So you guys have ideas when you said about getting the teachers involved? We're still trying to figure out how to get the parents involved. Because if you, just today, what was the Senator Cassidy's amendments, we went on a major blast. We're sitting here.
Yeah, you saw us going through, we had lunch here, we got a tour of the studio, but what you didn't see was us all furiously on our phones because there were 2 amendments that were added, that were proposed for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act by Senator Cassidy. He proposed 2 amendments, one to Title II Part A and one to Title II Part D, which would require specific attention to dyslexia and specific learning disabilities in those funding streams. So one funding stream for teacher training and one on the literacy training piece. And the first amendment went down today, right after lunch, 10 to 12. That's how close it came down. And there was major pushback from big wave disability groups across the country. They were appalled that we were asking for one disability category to be pulled out specifically. So we were all on the phones because the second
social media.
So we were sitting in a room on our phones, like trying to garner as many phone calls as we could. And we personally were calling all of them to say, we're disappointed that you voted no on Amendment 1. Please consider Amendment 2, because that's the Learn Act. That's where all the good literacy, scientific-based reading and instruction with no mention of reading disabilities or dyslexia in that piece of legislation. And all we were asking for was specific attention to this group that's most vulnerable, and that one failed today too.
And one of those no's was Senator Christopher from Connecticut. And we are very, very disappointed.
Yeah.
Because they made it so easy to contact him. You know, it's like dyslexic advancement, you guys are, you just had to fill in your name, your form letter, we called the offices, we emailed him, and it's so,
Well, one good thing in Pennsylvania is, see this? We finally have permission to use the D word. They said it at a special education conference, and we were so excited to we stood up and turned around. There were less people in this room that was 3 times the size that we have in this room right now. So nobody knows we can use it even though they gave us permission. So we're pretty bummed about this. This is just a little bit of detail about what's happening, what they're doing so far. But like I said, the conversation is much more important than what's going on there. But here's what it does provide. It provides more training for the teachers, which is actual OG training. They're supposed to go through the whole practicum, everything else that OG tutors go through. These 3 districts are supposed to have. And where it says it allows extra teacher training, but I've already told you that that can't happen because we don't have the OG teachers, people to do that. And then it's also teaching the parents and the teachers more about dyslexia, okay? So, and this is how it helps all students. It's not just our kids. When you do this, when you're screening them, it's something wrong. Go ahead.
I thought teachers have a training as part of education. That mean what? If I go to grade education, which is part of the master's diploma,
Right.
is it required that I get some type of education on dyslexia or one disability?
No.
So what I place to start?
Connecticut, and I have some slides that Connecticut so kindly shared, but they have some really unique legislation. So as soon as Tina's done,
well, you have to realize we're going all different directions. We're going for legislation, we're going for teacher training, we're going for teacher certification. Yeah, we're going through all of it. But we need more parents to step up and help us. That's what we really need. The more parents that make these phone calls. In Pennsylvania, I have people all the time say, on the eastern side of Pennsylvania, you have all these groups. Why aren't you doing it out here? We are you. We need you to do this.
Yeah, I don't think that is accurate for all states. Like New Jersey has a ton of parent involvement. I think
we actually have an overload here. Our support groups, we have a lot of involvement. So I don't.
Ours, unfortunately, are all in Bucks County. I will tell you something. As an advocate, you need that work. Right. But right now, when you go to school, they don't learn you help because you learn different. They give you a help.
Don't worry, we can cut it out.
We would all like to see this come out of special ed. We would all like to see a regular education. Actually, I'm going to say that. That was important. Pennsylvania's law is a regular education law. These are not special education kids. That's all happening in the regular education law.
But I think the reason it comes back along the parents is because they didn't know how to
Right. Yes, they do.
disability. My kid is disabled.
Or they don't want to have kids that have ID or labels.
And unfortunately, what happens is they wait. And when they're in 4th and 5th grade, then they realize, now you are going to call it disability. Because I would say this, my son is so profound that he was caught by November of 1st grade. Not a whole lot of kids are caught like that. In 5th grade, between that point and 5th grade, he had made 4 months progress. That's when I went and got myself trained as an advocate. You're not going to hurt my kid one more day, or you're not going to hurt one more kid if I can help it. That's what got me rolling. And I'm sure something similar happened to each one of these women that decided we are going to stop this. This is not going to happen. When I heard about them, I drove 100 miles to Princeton each month so I could come. And I'm like, I need this in my state. So I'm one of those parents that I didn't care what you were throwing at me. I was going to fight. At first it was just for my kid, and then I decided it needs to be for a lot of kids. But I hear what you're saying about the disability, but at some point you have to take the blinders off and know no one's going to do this for you. You know, and I don't mean you, I mean all of us. So you could get more support, you could say
Like calling it a learning difference, right?
Yeah,
I agree.
if you just be prominent, you don't talk about raising accommodations for disability, but we're not really asking for accommodations.
And I think that's where the education and awareness portion comes from. And I don't know about you, but even on the conversations I have, not through presentations, but just talking, I bring that out. You don't ever want to bring up the dyslexia word with me and not walk away in 2 minutes and talk about it.
So, I'm sorry, Tessa.
No, I was agreeing with Mrs. Matsakis. Yeah,
You stigmatized,
yeah, I just really don't like when people tell me, oh, like, you have a learning disability, like, I don't feel disabled. I really associate a disability with, like, being in a wheelchair or, like, not having a leg. I don't feel like I'm enabled. And I think that was Senator Cassidy's intention in putting that in the general education law. Right. To get an amendment into, you know, general education funding streams to make a point that, you know, this is not, we're not tackling special education resources, but this is a literacy-based issue. And I don't know how other states, it's not part of the formal decoding dyslexia mission statement or policy goals, but what we in New Jersey always say, our first priority is that dyslexia is a literacy issue, it's not a special education issue. Because our ultimate goal is to get these kids served early and well. And that doesn't mean that everyone is going to require special education. Some will and some won't. But it's really about addressing how poor the literacy instruction is in our country for all kids. Because what works for our kids is actually good for all four readers. Maybe not to the intensity that our kids will need, but definitely the knowledge piece.
And Tess brings up a great point, and this is, in Philadelphia, you would consider dyslexia a disability. It's not disabling. You're able to do so much. I could see that from the tour. But I think that it can become disabling in our public schools.
But wouldn't you say that's arbitrary, that non-dyslexics made decisions about how written language would look that works for them? And so it's just notional to say it's a disability for dyslexics. If dyslexics had invented it, it would be a disability, we would say disability for them. And so just following from what Diane is saying, what Tess is saying, you all are talking about struggles to get things done with legislatures, and that this whole disability group that has nothing to do with dyslexia come up and build the legislation. What if, following on what Tess and Diane are saying, instead of you following a legal strategy, a legislative strategy that's based on protect disabled people, it was, this is a civil right, gays, African Americans, any group that is not, and then that doesn't work either. What do you mean worse? What I'm saying is saying there's nothing disabled about it.
You do have a civil right to learn. None of your legislation.
Okay, but you're okay with someone who being like I'm not like in the civil rights movement, I'm not being segregated for having a learning disability.
Oh, I see what you mean. Good point, good point.
Like it sounds like you and a lot of people are saying, like, don't segregate me because I have a learning disability. It's not something that is gonna pull me aside from everyone. It's not something that
Good point.
like
Good
it's
point.
very different than every great.
Do you have a way that you feel that you would feel comfortable with, and that adults that are completely illiterate in this concept would get? Okay, the people that we're dealing with when we're trying to legislate, they really don't understand what any of this what we're talking about. So it's educating them. How do we educate them in a way that you feel comfortable with the terminology?
Well, I think a lot of it isn't important. Even if something isn't a law, it doesn't mean that it's not like common courtesy. Like it's not a law that you can respect your elders. It's common courtesy. I don't think that's something that should be implemented every day, not necessarily be a law. So instead of focusing all your energy on legislative, I don't think you can have that word in 20 minutes a lot. But I think that you just start with having people like myself or Sal or someone who is absolutely elected talking to other people about it. It doesn't have to be someone that can make a physical change. A lot of limited change is going on. And if someone really doesn't want to vote on something, they can say,
that they are here, that they have the ability to come here, is because of some of the laws that are in place, so that they went to hearing. They could go and stand up for their rights, and they went to hearing, and the school had to pay for them to go to Caldona. Had that law not been in place, we wouldn't have had the safety or protection, and it might get watered down, it might be like that, but in a way, I need to have that to support my son, my child. I need that protection and that safety for him. Is it ideal? I wish that it could be, and I think it's both ways. We want to change the way society thinks on this. It's a societal change. And you can have the best laws in place. Let's look at Texas. They have the best laws in place. Are their literacy levels higher than any other state? They're not, but they do offer some protection at trafficking, and they are far from that. I did want to share this. Connecticut was so kind to share some slides. This is actually from March and I really think that their legislation is going to that issue that you had talked about teaching teachers. So I'll just tell you that generally the snapshot that Margie was able to explain to me is basically now new teachers are required to take this reading certification test, and they need to pass that. So that's kind of forcing the universities to teach those appropriate methods. But then we also have all these teachers that are there that have not had that training, right? So they're giving the test anonymously to them, and then they're going based on need to the schools, because what we talked about is there's not having enough people to tutor or train. And they're going to the schools in the most need, and that's how they're starting it. So this has just been passed, and I don't know if you wanted to add any comments to that, but Margie has been really, Literacy House has been pushing this too, but it just seemed like an amazing concept, because it goes down to the university level. I was meeting with the superintendent in New York, and we were talking about it, and I said, it really comes down to that teacher training. And he told me I was naive, that universities are a business, and not everyone graduates from a university. So I was being very naive to think that we could, teach the teachers appropriately, which was interesting meeting. But but I do think that it is starting to change. We're seeing universities now that are teaching businesses. So, but it goes back. I mean, you bring up such a good point, Tess. I mean, it's not just the legislation and the law. Unfortunately, I feel that there needs to be some protection so that they can get the education, because there are so many people that don't have the chance of it. The only shot they're going to get is in the public school setting. That's all they get. They don't have an advocate. They might have a single mom. They might be on welfare. And that's the only shot that they're going to get. Sometimes that's the only good meal they'll get is at school. I was talking to a teacher, and the first thing she does is when she sees her students, and she's like, did you eat? Did you eat? Did you sleep? Is everything okay at home? I mean, those are some of the things that we're dealing with, and to me, that's the quality of life. We want to improve the quality of life for everybody. So I guess we can just open up this roundtable, because I was going to I think there's some important conversations that are taking place, if that's okay. We just have a conversation. I think it works good this way. First of all, hi there. Oh, hi.
to build upon that.
I just want to highlight the whole thing about how whole language is just, it's still, that's what's being taught in all these teacher education schools. And, one of them, the new chancellor of New York City, she's, right back into the whole teachers college thing. And if you look on the teachers college website, where they give their scientific background on a lot of these programs, they start with after the kids are already reading. And they only focus on how it's the scientific validity is where content. And so, they never get to do code. They never, they don't even touch it. So,
Well, so we we have the International Dyslexia Association. There's also actually changed the name, I'm not sure what it is now, but it was the International Reading Association. And they were proponents of the language. And they have put out there, if you look at the membership in IDA and the membership in IRF, there's dwarf scholars. Everyone's over here. And the Dyslexia Training Institute out in California, they're like, we keep preaching to the choir. We're going to go to Kildonan and tell Kildonan about dyslexia. They know. So what they did is they actually went to their conference.
Yeah, we're presenting there this year.
Are you?
So that's something Kildonan could do. Get your teachers to apply to those types of conferences. That's where we need to be submitting our papers. We love to go to IDA, but we're talking to our friends when we're there. And we need to find places where these educators are already operating, because expecting them to find us and come to us isn't necessarily the best course. So let's find like ILA.
And they said they were swarmed. They said their table was swarmed. People were like,
Yeah. They encouraged me to go, so now we have 2 presentations that we're doing there. They're doing another one, and we're going to have tables. So we're like, okay, how do we infiltrate the camps that don't have this information yet?
send her.
Test your mouth to be putting dyslexia in. And we have 2 right here.
In those ways, what we're dealing with such entrenched groups. And when you look at even the publishers of all the curriculum, everything's set up in a way that it does not work well for our children. And until we force it down their throat, or they force it down our throat, that's a terrible way to put it, but that's kind of what it is. Because right now, our children are sitting in that classroom, and I think you said earlier, you said, what if you went to a job every day and they made you feel dumb and you didn't like it or whatever? And she brought an important part. You can't quit. You have to go. You can quit your job. Your kid can't quit because you're sending them off to school every day until we wind up pulling them in a place like Kildonan.
It's so true. When I started this journey of talking to parents, to hear about an 11-year-old or 10-year-old that has full-blown panic attacks because they have to go every day to that, and then we have to sometimes send them. It's unbelievable to me that, what happens emotionally to these kids to protect their souls. It's just, let me ask both of you. So if you were to go to Dyslexia Legislation Day, what would you want those legislators to hear? What would you tell the senator or the senator? What do you want to say? Not with us. What would you want to tell them?
It's something that we have, it's not necessarily a special change way to be taught, and without that, we're kind of left behind. And no one likes to get left behind.
How long have you been here?
I think this is my 2nd day, but I have also been in other areas since actually 5th grade is when I got it. If I didn't, I would be. I'm not a dumb kid, I'm not concerned.
We get it.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Without it, I probably wouldn't be able to voice this opinion or write something down. But I wish that people need to find out about it and kids need to learn so they can see it among themselves and really just change their face up. Because the kids are the ones who can see it first.
Other kids.
Other kids.
That's what would you say? I think it's important to have a set
school?
Just from
Talking to other
There's even here, some things that I'm really bad at that other people are amazing at, and we're both emphasizing. Or some things that I'm really good at, other people are not. And it's not, even though we have seen, like, we're in the same time frame, it's very, very different. All things like you see one person with autism, you see one person with autism. It's exactly the same as this.
Exactly the same person, same with everyone, right?
Yeah, to be honest. Very. But, yeah, believe me, it's a good thing.
Kevin, what would you say?
To the
If you went to the
legislature.
legislature and you were wanting to push for something, how would you say it? What would you say?
I would say get rid of this idea that's become very popular that if you leave it all up to local governments, local districts, everything will work out fine. And I know that's popular as part of the frontier mentality in the American historical tradition, but it's ended up really harming so many bright, dyslexic teenagers, younger dyslexic students in so many places. And
What would you say? What would you want to say?
I mean, I really feel like that there's a lot of principals don't understand, like, they don't use the word dyslexia. And they say it's like a disease, it's not a disorder. And they like really don't understand it. They're like, my public school never used the word dyslexia. They always called it, oh, you have a disease, you'll get over it, we'll move on. And none of my teachers really understood what it was like for me to sit in that classroom and get those grade books and not be able to read and just have all those people look at you like you were insane. So like, they need to use the word dyslexia. Like, Connecticut never used to be able to use it until a couple years ago.
Well, first thing, I wish I lived up here, but I'm from North Carolina. And
You gotta move here. You
yeah,
gotta
well,
It's not working.
But, you know, it's just hard, I guess, harder for me to fight just because I'm in North Carolina. And it seems like you guys are doing a lot better than.
But what would you want to say to someone in North Carolina, though? I mean, what would you want them to know?
So much. I mean, I wish they would just understand and realize, like, how much those teachers actually affect us. And the little things they say, like, I still remember one of my teachers saying, you know how to read, you just want to give me the you just want me to give you the answers. And I mean, that will stick with me for the rest of my life. I mean, I just wish teachers could understand.
It's the effect, absolutely the effect that teachers, you know, put on our children. It's how they're affected. And it comes to a point like me, my daughter was in school for 4 years. And it got to a point when my daughter was laying on the floor in 5th grade for a year. The psychologist couldn't get her out. I couldn't bring her back, no matter what I did as a parent. And it was because of like what he said, those words. You know, tell your mother I'm teaching you 9 times table because you don't know your 2 times table. And she'd come home and say, you know, teach me my 9 times table. And I'd be like, but Gina, you know your 2 times and you know your 9 times. 9 times 2 and 2 times is 18, right? She's like, yeah. I'm like, so you know it. She doesn't know. So you have to teach her. I mean, my daughter was teaching teachers. The 5th grade, you're teaching teachers. How does that work? You know, and it gets to a point where 4 weeks of 6th grade, and they just couldn't do it. And my daughter said, Mom, I don't get in those school. Pulled her out. You're going to Logan. It was just like so simple. I'll sell my house, whatever it takes. You're going. And guess what? My daughter lives here. She's 11 years old. She's here 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She's herself. Her education affected her so much. She wasn't living at home. She's living here. I mean, I'm so passionate about it, and I'm trying to teach parents, you know, on Long Island. I'm there all by myself. I do support groups now every month. Because you know what? I don't want them telling me to do this. You know, and Gina, you know, fueled my fire because how do teachers affect an education affect? We're not talking about education anymore. We're talking about helping a child not eating, not sleeping, affect a child to that point where she was not functioning and no quality of life. My husband, all of us, to now 6 weeks living on her own because guess what? He learned how to manage his child, knows how to teach. I had teacher conferences today. What was it like? It was inspiring, in positive words, just all inspirational. And Jesus, all 6 weeks. Wow, they did it in 6 weeks, the 4 years they were.
You guys do amazing things. But I don't think learning to read should be for the lucky or the rich. And that's the thing, it's not just for the lucky or the rich. When I say lucky, my kid's lucky because he's got me as a mom. Because I can't afford this. And there's other people who can afford your process when they get here. There's other parents that can maybe be here. But what about all the rest?
I know some, you said, I heard legislation so many times here tonight, or like, I'm not sure it's like civil rights movement comparison, but what I will say is every child has the right to be educated in our public education system because we're not all as fortunate to be able to participate in these types of wonderful schools, and thank God they're here. But that's not the reality of our country and masses of people. And when you look at some of the other statistics, like those who don't graduate high school, those that are incarcerated, the percentage of illiteracy rates in our juvenile justice system, like these are the kids that don't have champions that can speak up for them. So sometimes legislation can be that champion for them and can set a bar that they draw a line in the sand and holds school systems accountable. Now we know that that accountability is shaky a lot of the time, but we're the people that hold that accountable then. And we have to think about ourselves beyond the individual advocacy and think about from a systemic approach. And I think my comparison to the civil rights movement was, it was really hard for some of those parents to send their kids into all-white high schools. You know, 8 kids integrated with Little Rock Central High School, right, on their own. And they got abused daily, and they were talked bad about by their teachers and other students, and, you know, sitting at lunch counters and being physically ketchup put on your head and things like that. And I think about us, and, you know, some of us have our kids in public schools, some of us are fighting the school districts through due process. Like, sometimes you just want to give up and say, like, oh, I wish I could just, like, go away or whatever. But it is our job to fight for these kids because it's not just my 2 sons. I'm fighting for a whole population of kids that might not have someone there who can afford them.
Well, it depends on which website.
Right.
So all that money, you're training those teachers need to be trained. And in order to put the right regulation, because whatever you define that as, and before you're saying is a defining school, you also, you're not going to have these separate environments. Or everything, the whole classroom with focuses, whether it's discussed or not, discussed as a community, because they're in that.
Every school district has a TV budget, let's be honest. Every school district is spending it. We're already spending it all. When we had a meeting in New Jersey, we said your general fund, reallocate your general fund to put a focus on early literacy. That's how we pushed it through. And we didn't worry that there was no allocation of state funding. It's reading instruction.
It's a perfect analogy.
That's right.
We all absolutely agree with what you're saying. That's what we said. And then we wound up with Senator Flanagan. Senator Flanagan says there's an IEP process.
Okay, insufficient.
And that's where the big boys all is coming together. I did, for my son, we had a good school, you know what I mean? It was a good school, but still didn't get the help. And they tried to help him as much as they could. It was a great teacher. They tried everything to us. progress that second year. How much is 230 hours? How much does that cost? But wait, what's the emotional toll on that? Because what happens to the teachers? They try everything. They try their hardest to get this boy to read, and finally they're not able to do it. This is what they say. He's not trying as hard. Or something's going on at home. I've had, for the first girls that got sick, they said that it's because he ate too much sugar that he's not reading. That's so 230 hours. And now times that by how many kids, because kids are getting pulled out. But that is costing money, and we're wasting it.
Because the other side is beating, everything that we're doing, the other side is beating 10 times more. There's 10 times more.
They're going in to say it costs too much, there's no need to screen every child. There's a whole
nowhere, because I spoke to someone at the NICHD 7 years ago, and I said, who's the police for RTI? He said, nobody is. It's left to the states were kind of asked to do this, and they're supposed to fund it. And I've been talking to people on the Board of Regents 5 or 6 years ago, and they said, well, I guess we can give more AIS money, which is New York Academic Services. And then they sent that out, the principals just spend it anyway they want. And so there's no kind of oversight, and that's why we need legislation that's going to oversee this. And I just want to interject to, we have so many stakeholders here. And, you know, presumably developing some kind of plan of action for future steps. I really think this has to happen not at the school level, at the district level. Because there's just too much resistance, there's too much. If every child can go someplace in their district, because then you won't have the collapse. And then it can be in compressed time. My kids also went through the whole, you know, mainstream, but they have limited with Bell, which is very compressed. And if you, whatever program you're going to use, if you compress it more, you know, they'll get it faster and they can be mainstream. And so I would just implore everybody in each state to think of it at district level. We have to offer every child in our district this. K through 12, because there's some kids who went through and didn't get help when they should have, so.
Right, but when you're the only child that is diagnosed, report on paper, how do you?
You won't be the only, it's 5 or 6 in every classroom.
I understand that, but when you go to a district and you sit and talk to the district, and I sat and talked to my whole district, and, you know, Gina's the only one. I'm like, that's the problem.
My kid was the first dyslexic this teacher ever taught. She was a 20-year special education teacher. And my response was, he's the first one that was so severe he couldn't show him under the rug.
We actually have, there are many children with this profile in the school. Now it's like, you know, we can just wait, but it's like we failed to be good, we expect them to be now.
Exactly. That's the problem. One teacher might be good, but
You do have, you have current things that you have to deal with, but you also have long range. And all of your groups, if you could, I'm going to go back to teacher training, because that's where you have to make the difference. You need pre-service teachers getting the training that they need. And it's, you know, people can say that they have training, people can say that Wilson. Wilson is a wonderful program, but if you have a weekend at Wilson, you're not going to be able to help anybody.
new teachers, go for certification, put some requirements in. And this year, the bill that we're working on now is for all teachers, and we've actually been, we have all teachers that are already certified, that are licensed in Connecticut, and we've had Dr. Paulus, who is the specialist in the state, works with the teachers, and she has been addressing education. So we're in Connecticut, we're requiring that they have, is it 12? I can't even remember off the top of my head right now. And the bill that we're working on.
And that means you really have to have a group that's focused, within your group, that's focused on that.
But Connecticut is much smaller than New York, so it's about, they try to get something through.
We have run into some problems at the university level, at Albany, telling us that dyslexia doesn't even exist. And he is the head of the reading department, there, so.
We have work in New Jersey with Ryder and Trenton State, and we go in, we're getting students that are either student teacher level, so they're in their first
Yeah.
placement.
Tess has I'm sorry, her ACTs too.
There was one caveat that I saw. Was only, I guess if you bought an insurance policy and you never ever used it for anything, then it can't be deducted. So your basic medical one is definitely, whatever you pay, even if you're employed.
Whatever my
Whatever you pay.
Thank you.
Hey, it was nice meeting you.
you.
Good luck.
Thank you. See you soon.